moment and talk to you about historic houses. Now, if you're an investor and you're playing in the historic house arena, there is a lot that you need to know. First of all, if it's your first house, you probably should not be in an historic house. There's so many things that can go wrong because of the requirements of the city, the historic district, the conservation district, that it's just not a paint and carpet a lot of times on a historic house. There's a lot more to it, and I'm going to teach you some of the ins and outs and tricks of the trade and things that you need to be aware of if you choose to approach historic houses. First of all, some houses are in HOAs, some houses are in historic districts, some houses are in conservation districts. So if you choose to do a house that is historic in Texas, most areas historic is 1949 and older, but it has to be in one of these areas, an area that is very, it's important to them. It might be important to the city, it might be important to the HOA, it might be important to the historic district, that house is rehabbed a certain way. Know that I've had houses before that were in historic districts, that were in conservation districts and HOAs, and we're in say a city. So I had to go to 4 different places to get all of my plans, all of my sketches, all of my changes to that house approved. One time I did a house that had an HOA and and the city was involved very heavily into it. And the HOA would approve it, but the city would not. I'd go back and make the changes for the city. The city approved it, but the HOA did not. So you have to kind of figure out what each one of those wants and then rehab your house to please all parties, not just one of them. Unless there's just one involved, like sometimes there's just an historic district that cares about the layout of that house or how that house comes after a remodel. A lot of times when you're doing a historic house, the most important part of the house is the front of the house. So if there is a wraparound porch on the front of the house, the Historic Society is going to be very keen on not letting you take that porch and make it into square footage, because that porch is what makes that house so unique. So if you think of the front structure of a property, most of the time you're not going to be able to change the way that it looks. You can add to it, you can update it, but you can't actually change how it physically looks. This is especially important with large trees. You can add landscaping, you can add bushes, you can do rocks, you can do mulch, landscaping edge, that type of stuff. Typically, there again, get it approved by whoever the parties be that you need to be speaking with. However, most of the time you cannot cut down large trees unless it's a structural issue. For example, if you have a large tree, a big old oak tree or willow tree or whatever it is, and it's next to the house, sometimes they're not going to let you cut that down, even though it's damaging your plumbing, even though it's damaging your foundation. I have seen several instances where people have cut down trees in historic areas. One guy I know, he cut down like 20 trees in front of an office building in a historic district, and the city fined him $1,000 per tree that he cut down. No mercy, no grace. That was their rules, and that's exactly what they did. So if you're cutting down trees, be very careful. Trimming them up typically is not a problem, but check what you can and can't do with the parties that be on these particular houses. A lot of houses in historic areas have wood windows in them, and it's very important to most historic districts that you replace the windows with wood windows. We had a client a little while ago. He said, look, aluminum windows are cheaper. I don't want to put wood windows in it. We said, you need to put wood windows in it. This is a historic area. He chose not to listen to us. He had us install vinyl windows. The Historic Society came, said, no, we don't approve your windows. Take them all out. And he ended up buying wood windows anyways. They're very, very strict on preserving the house as much as they possibly could to the original, or when it was originally built. So most of the time you're going to have to redo the wood windows. Now, I've had this discussion with a lot of people. Can't I just sand them down, bond them, put new glass in them, and repair the windows that are existing? The answer is yes. About 5 or 6 houses, we ran the numbers. How much would it cost us if we actually paid labor to fix the windows, or how much would it cost us just to install a new window? And across the board, the cost to install the new window, get it from somebody who built it properly square, was better and cheaper than to redo the window that was there. So if you're going to redo windows in a historic house, I highly recommend that you put a brand new one in, and that you don't fix the window that is in existing, with few exceptions. Sometimes it's just a very, very minor fix, but most of the time the whole window seal is rotted out. And by the amount of time of labor and material and manpower you put in to fix that, it's better to get something that looks nicer for cheaper. The newer window is actually cheaper for us to install than to do everything manually. Now, with a historic window particularly, the way the historic windows were built, if you look on the inside of a window, there's a really thick trim piece. And people are like, oh, that's how they used to build the houses back in the day. You put a really thick pieces of window trim inside the house. Well, the truth is, behind that thick window piece on one side or the other, there's typically a wheel and a rope. And that wheel and rope will actually lift the window up or lift the window down. So if you take off that piece of trim, then it will expose the wheel and the rope on the back side of it. I'm telling you this because if you order new windows, sometimes that wheel and rope is thinner nowadays. They build it thinner, and a lot of people measure from inside the window to inside the window, and then once they take everything out, they don't calculate for that lever. So if you're going to measure your windows, you really need to take that framing off on the outside of the interior trim. I'll take the interior trim off so that way you can measure the window properly, and then you should call your vendor or figure out what size your new windows are going to be, because you may have to frame that out a little bit in order for that window to place in there properly. Also, when you do that, sometimes when you take out that lever, the wheel on the outside of the house, you'll have to remove the siding, or the siding will come off with it. And keep that in mind, that you might have to replace some of that old siding, that historic siding, that's part of the replacement of the window. A lot of historic districts, conservation districts, require that the inside of the house be as original as possible. I've seen people require original stoves or certain size stoves, you know, the huge, you know, I don't know what they are, 52-inch stoves or whatever they are. I've also seen hardwood floors be a requirement. You can only install hardwood floors. You have to repair or replace any hardwood floors that are currently in this house, and if you can't repair or replace it, then you have to match it to something equivalent, and that'll have to be approved by a lot of historic societies. Now, most of the time on the inside of the house, you can pretty much do whatever you want. I'm just letting you know that sometimes they require the inside of the house to be in as original condition as possible, especially in areas where it's high tourist areas, or you're going to use the property for like a bed and breakfast, something that, or a gift shop, or a commercial building that would be turned into some sort of shop. They are going to want the interior of that house to be historically approved as well. As far as siding goes on a historic house, you have to be careful that you do an exact match. There's a lot of third-party boards out there or parties that look real similar, and in my experience, it's been very hard for us to say, oh, this looks so close to this. Mainly what they're looking for is if you have like a 3-inch board that's siding, they want a 3-inch board, and most of the time you're not going to be able to replace wood with vinyl or wood with aluminum. They want you to replace wood with wood, and they want exactly what is there. Now, there are some manufacturers out there that mass produce what was used a lot, but the stuff that wasn't used a lot, like really thick boards with a design in it or something like that, it's not as easy to go find a vendor to match. We've done some historic houses. We've went to 20, 30 places to try to find an exact match, and sometimes we find it, sometimes we don't. When we're not able to find the exact match, then you have to go to a wood mill. You take a piece of your old siding, you send it to the wood mill, and the wood mill then retools up some of their tools or uses some of their tools, orders in new tools to make the exact board that you're looking for. For this reason alone, the siding on the exterior of a house, on a historic house, could be 3 to 4 times the amount of normal siding on a house. Now keep in mind, if you put siding on it, a lot of times you're going to get raw wood back, and unlike vinyl where you don't have to paint it, you're going to then have to prime it and then paint the siding in a historical area. Colors are so important in an historic area, it's unbelievable. You have to get your colors approved because there's some colors they won't let you paint the exterior of your house. A lot of guys that I know that are doing historic houses on a regular basis use red, white, and blue on the outside. Typically, for some reason, those colors get approved, but you also have a lot of the mustard colored houses, some of the pastel greens. Just make sure that your color is approved for that area. Don't go paint your house and then you'll have to repaint it because you didn't do it right the first time. White is real good for the trim and the balusters and the railings. A lot of times, there again, get it approved, get it approved, get it approved. I can't say it enough. Now, when you're redoing the siding on an historic house, keep in mind that that house may have not have been insulated. It may not have a moisture barrier on it, and there may not be any decking on that particular house. So if you take off the siding, a lot of times when you take off the interior wall, the sheetrock, or the exterior wall, the siding, you have to bring the house all the way up to code. So you may put it in your budget to just do the exterior siding. Once you remove that exterior siding and the inspector comes and looks at the property, because it may be an inspector for the historic district, not the inspector from the city, they might tell you, you need a moisture barrier, you need to rewire this house, you need to re-insulate this house, and you need some sort of backer on it, plywood or whatever it is, between the moisture barrier and the siding that you're putting on. Those are all additional expenses that you should expect when you're going into a historic house, and sometimes you don't know about these other things until you actually rip off the siding. I've also seen it happen where we've taken off siding to go and get a match for it, and the city said you can't put that siding back on because you need to fix the stuff behind it before you even put what you took off of it that matches correctly back on. On some houses, on the interior and the exterior, there's lattice board. So unlike how we do our houses now where we do like a 2x4 and we put sheetrock up to it, in the old days they put some sort of lattice board and put newspaper in the walls or blue in insulation. And the lattice board is just, a lot of times it's a 1 inch or something like that. It's 1 inch and it goes 6, 8, 10 feet. I'm letting you know this because sheetrock doesn't stick to it so well. Nails stick out of it, so if you do try to sheetrock it, you'll get little holes coming through your sheetrock. And a lot of times all that lattice board has to be ripped off before you can install, say, proper sheetrock. Another thing is the boards in most historic houses, they're true 2x4s. So when you're pricing it out, you can't just get a 2x4 from the store, from say a box store, because a lot of times those 2x4s are really not 2 inches by 4 inches. They are 3.5 inches by 1.5 inch. So if you have a smaller board and you put it next to a bigger board, you have a little bit of a gap either on the interior or the exterior. There's a couple of things you can do. You can shim it, you can add a 2x4 and then another board on top of it to make it the size of the old 2x4s. Or you can actually buy real 2x4s, but they're a lot more expensive than a 2x4 that you would see at a box store. Just be aware that both your interior and your exterior walls may be real 2x4 size, and that makes it so not everything might be straight, or you might have to finesse it to make everything line up properly. It's very common that a house, the foundation of the house is actually on tree stumps. If you see this, you're going to have to somehow lift the house up, remove the tree stump, and put some sort of proper support, some sort of pier, cinder blocks, whatever the application may require, depending upon how it's set up. Just don't be, if you see trees underneath your house, there's actually real tree stumps that could be underneath your house in some situations. That was the support back in the day when they were building these houses. You're gonna have to adjust it, especially if you're gonna bring it up to the code of the city. A lot of times in these houses, they used old copper wires. I've literally seen just copper wires going from one side of the house to the other side with no insulation around it. Now the insulation that they use on wires is not insulation to keep heat in or keep it cold. The insulation is actually so it doesn't touch you, touch somebody else, doesn't electrocute you, doesn't electrocute your dog, and doesn't start a fire. Mainly they started putting insulation around wires so it does not start a fire. And a lot of these houses don't have that insulation, therefore they are fire hazards. I've seen probably 3 houses start on fire once the rehabs has started, because people start moving wires around, and a wire that was not arcing and was not touching, say, raw wood is now touching the raw wood, and I've seen fires happen in this manner. Just know that you're probably gonna have to rewire your whole entire house. A good indication is 2 prongs inside, aluminum, or anything prior to like 1949 will probably need a rewire, but ask your electrician if there's a solution to your particular application. Back in the day, people opened up their doors to get air conditioned. They opened up their windows to bring a breeze into the house. And a heater and an air condition sometimes was not an important application. They would do crazy things like have a kerosene heater, or they would just say, hey, open up all the windows, that's our AC. Because of that, and if you're trying to rehab a property and it's a historic property, you might come into a problem where there's actually no location for your air conditioning unit or your heat unit. A lot of times in these older homes, we're taking an old closet, we're using attic space. Sometimes the attics are very narrow, they don't have space for it. So you have to think about where's your AC going to go, and you have to build out a spot for it to go to, especially the return air ducts. Where are your air ducts going to go? Are they going to go under their house? Are they going to go over the house? Are they going to be insulated? How are you going to insulate them? If you drop an AC into a closet, for example, remember you need to put power in that closet as well, and you need to have a drain for your moisture runoff. ACs, by what they do is they suck in moisture. That's how you get cold inside your house, because they're taking away all the moisture, and they need somewhere to put that moisture. So a lot of times there's a drain pan on the back side of an AC. You need to calculate that, or at least need to know that all that's going wherever you're going to put your AC. If your house does not have an air conditioning unit, make sure you consider this before you just think you're going to put one in a spot that doesn't exist. A lot of times on the interior, the base molding or the window molding is a simple 1x6. Some people try to get real fancy and go get this decorative, really expensive stuff. A lot of times you can put a 1x6 as crown molding, as baseboard molding, as door trim, window trim, and you're going to be just fine. That's actually a cheaper way to rehab a lot of these houses than to go buy a fancy decorative type of molding. Sometimes you can even pull out the old fancy decorative stuff and just put a 1x6 in. Most of the time that's going to look pretty well with your property. There again, consult your historic district. It's really common that once you start remodeling a historic house that it wasn't built square in the first place, or it's been sitting there so long that the boards are warped, they're bowed, and you might need to have a contractor that specializes in this type of house, because there's tricks that you can use to make things appear square or be square when the house is not square. So a lot of times these houses have shifted, they've moved, they have weight on them, they have heat on them, they sat in water for whatever reason, and they're not completely square. Just know that going in, you can typically spend a little extra money to make it square, or you might just have to be okay with the whole house kind of not being perfectly square because it's so old, and it might not be worth your money to make it perfectly square all the way through the house. Now you want your doors square, you want your door jambs square, but sometimes you'll see a fully rehabbed house and it's got a little wavy wall to it. That's because the whole house is not square. There is most of the time a very, very large beam that goes through the center of the rafters in the ceiling of a house. This large beam on these old historic houses is the main piece of structure and support that they use back in these days. Sometimes you see it underneath the house as well, sometimes there's two, but most of the time there's one really large beam in the rafters above the sheetrock. This is important because that beam, because it's holding all of the weight, if there's other walls underneath it or other walls that are tying into it, and you want an open concept where you need to open up a wall, say make a kitchen, a living room better, or you're changing a staircase or something along those lines, you might not be able to do it as easy as you could, say, on a house in the 1950s or 1960s, because you're going to interrupt that beam up there. If you peek your head in the attic and you know where that beam is, you'll have a better idea of where you can adjust your walls. But I'm just letting you know there's a giant beam up there, and you can't just remove walls from underneath it, and you can't mess with that beam itself, or you lose the structural integrity of your house. So consider this if you plan to open up everything, say, on the bottom floor of a house. Somehow, some way, you're going to have to re-support that beam to adjust the weight on your house, so then you can blow open the walls. The water lines in an historic house were typically made out of copper. Copper is not necessarily a bad product, but sometimes they're also made out of lead. If they were made out of lead, you always have that effect of, hey, you're drinking water made out of lead pipe. You're essentially shoving lead into your body. Most of the time, they're going to have to be replaced. And also a lot of times the sewer line was made out of cast iron. If it's been sitting there for 50 or 60 or 100 years, that cast iron is probably rotten. And most of the time, once you do one, you have to do the other. Per city code, a lot of times in these areas, they say, okay, your sewer line is bad, you also need to replace your fresh water. So just know that if you're doing one, you're probably doing both, and most of the time they're going to be bad in these houses, especially once you start fixing the foundation. Once you start moving stuff and shifting stuff, they're going to snap, they're going to break. And almost across the board, we're seeing people replace both fresh water and sewers because it's so old and it's made out of material that is really not good. It's either not good for you or it rots away, such as the sewer lines when they're made out of cast iron. A lot of times, the roofs on a historic house, which kind of makes them unique, and this is the character that people like, they're very, very, very steep. This is a problem for you when you're remodeling it for a couple reasons. One, roofers are going to charge a lot more money to redo the roof, especially if it has wood shake shingles on it. 2, it may be so narrow that you can't run heat ducts in it, you can't run vents in it, you can't install an AC unit properly. Not that any of it's a real big problem, but just know that a little extra cost is going to be added to your budget if your roofs are insanely steep. Also, along the same line, sometimes you have steep roofs and you have a lot of little sub roofs on that house. That's not going to be a normal roofing job, and you might have to do certain shades that aren't approved. Like you might not just be able to do black, they may want to do some sort of other color or a mixed color on your roof when you're redoing your roofs. Another thing with the roofs is a lot of times people have just been putting shingle after shingle after shingle on these roofs, so the tear-off cost for every layer of shingles, it's like $20 extra or $15 extra per layer of shingles. So if you have 4 extra layers, you could be $1,000 or $2,000 just more on the tear-off of that house because they're removing so much material. And remember, if they remove the roofing material, somebody has to dispose of it, and roofing material is the most expensive stuff to dispose of cost-wise at the landfill. My name is Ron Carlson. I'm with Renovation Gurus. I appreciate you taking time to watch all this information. I'm hoping that it benefits you in your investment world, that you are able to buy more houses, that you're wiser, smarter because of this education. Propelio Academy has a lot more videos. Continue to watch them, continue to educate yourself. If for some reason you want to contact me or you want to contact somebody on my team, feel free to reach us at renovationgurus.com. You can also call our 855 number. It's 855-99-GURUS. Gurus translated as 48787. So it'll be 855-99-48787, or you can reach us at admin@renovationgurus.com. If you have questions, if you need a bid, feel free to reach out to us. Thank you for your time.